The night was cruel on the broken planet. The cold wind slid through the cracks of the crashed ship like knives, and the stars above looked sharp and distant, offering no comfort. Daniel lay inside what was left of his shelter, wrapped in a thin bedroll that smelled of smoke and old battles. He was tired, hungry, and colder than he had ever been in his life. Yet even in that misery, he had one small comfort. He was alone. Alone meant safe. Alone meant no one could betray him. Alone was the only thing keeping him sane, or so he thought. It began with a faint sound, not the shriek of the wind, not the groan of metal. It was softer, like a whisper or the dragging of weak footsteps. Daniel's eyes snapped open, his soldier's instinct kicking in. His hand moved automatically to the sidearm lying next to him. He listened, holding his breath. Then he felt it, a weight pressing against his side and something warm slipping into his bedroll. He turned sharply, ready to push it away, but froze when he saw her, the alien girl. Her skin glowed faintly in the darkness, not with fire, but with a soft silver light, like the moon reflected on water. Her hair, if it could be called that, shimmered, in thin strands like glass threads. She was small, fragile-looking, and her eyes, huge and luminous, were wide with desperation. Without asking, she crawled fully inside, pressing her trembling body against his. "What the hell are you doing?" Daniel hissed, trying to shove her away. Her lips parted and her voice came out weak, broken. "Warmth. Need warmth. Or I die." Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. She was one of them, the survivors of the ship that had once been his enemy. He had seen her before, wandering near the ruins, alone, half-starved. He had thought she would not last long in this world's brutal nights, yet here she was, clinging to him as though her life depended on it. And maybe it did. Her body was cold, colder than any human's, but she trembled violently, trying to draw heat from him. Daniel's training screamed at him to push her away. She could be a spy, a trick, a danger. Letting her stay could mean his death. But another part of him, the part that remembered humanity before war, saw only a girl who had nowhere else to go. For a long moment, he stayed rigid, heart pounding, staring at her pale face so close to his own. Then, slowly, he let his hand fall away from the gun. He did not push her out. He did not speak again. He simply let her stay. The night dragged on. Her breathing was shallow at first, quick with fear and weakness, but gradually it steadied as she pressed closer. Daniel felt the warmth leaving his own body to enter hers, felt her coldness lessen, felt her muscles unclench as the life returned to her. It was strange, uncomfortable, and yet something in him softened. For months, he had only known silence, hunger, and suspicion. Now there was another living being lying against him, trusting him enough to sleep. When dawn finally touched the broken ship with weak light, Daniel blinked awake and found her still there, curled against him like a child. For the first time in a long while, he had not dreamed of fire and war. He had simply dreamed of warmth. She stirred, her eyes opening, and for a second they stared at one another. No words were spoken. She gave the faintest nod, then slipped out of the bedroll silently. Daniel watched her go, wondering if it had been real, or if loneliness had played a cruel trick on his mind. But the lingering warmth beside him told the truth. That was the first night, and it would not be the last. The days after the first night passed like shadows, slow, cold, and uncertain. Daniel kept telling himself it had been only a moment of weakness. He had let the alien girl stay in his bedroll because she would have died without his warmth. That was all. It meant nothing more. At least, that was the lie he repeated to himself. Every morning, but every night she came back. At first, Daniel thought it was only desperation. She would slip into the bedroll silently, her hands icy, her body trembling. She said almost nothing, only murmuring the same words. Warmth. Need warmth. Her voice was so soft, like someone speaking in a dream. He told himself he should push her away, make her find her own shelter, remind her that they were not friends but survivors from two sides of a broken war. Yet he never did. Instead, he lay still while she curled closer, as if trying to hide inside his very skin. And though the nights were bitter, though his own body shivered as he gave away more heat than he could spare, he let her stay. There was something in the way she clung to him, something that stirred a part of him he thought had died long ago, the part that wanted to protect. It was on the fourth night when she finally spoke more than a whisper. Her voice was still weak, but clearer now, trembling like a string pulled too tight. "My name, Liara." Daniel turned his head slightly, surprised. He studied her silver face, her wide glowing eyes staring back at him in the darkness. He hadn't expected her to share that with him. Names had power. Names meant trust. He gave a short nod, his voice rough. "Daniel." She repeated it softly, tasting the word like it was new. Dan-eel. The way she said it made something twist in his chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken his name without shouting it in command or warning. On her lips, it sounded almost gentle. The next days, Daniel noticed more about her. She was fragile, yes, but not weak in spirit. He saw the way she struggled to walk through the ruins, searching for scraps of food or broken tools, never giving up even when her body shook with hunger. He noticed how carefully she listened when he showed her which roots could be eaten, which ones would make her sick. She learned quickly, even though the bitter taste made her gag. At night, she asked small questions. "Why do you stay here? Why not leave this place?" Daniel shrugged, staring into the shadows. "Nowhere else to go." She tilted her head, her glowing eyes reflecting the faint light of the dying fire. "You help me. You don't have to." He didn't answer right away. His hands tightened on the blanket, and for a moment the soldier in him wanted to say something cold, something that would keep distance between them. But then he looked at her, the way her thin shoulders shook from the cold even as she pressed close to him, and he said quietly, "Because you'd freeze without me." Liara blinked at him, and then for the first time she smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it reached her eyes. Daniel hadn't realized how much he had missed seeing a smile. That night, her breathing steadied against him sooner than before, and he felt less like a soldier guarding an enemy, and more like a man sharing his warmth with someone who needed. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm became unspoken. During daylight, they scavenged together. He showed her how to set small traps, how to listen for danger. At night, she returned to his side, always slipping into the bedroll as though it was her rightful place. The strange bond between them grew quietly, like a fragile flame sheltered from the wind. It wasn't love, not yet, and it wasn't trust, in its full strength. But it was something neither of them had expected to find again after losing so much. And though Daniel told himself he could end it at any time, that he was only giving her what she needed to survive, deep inside he knew. The truth, he needed her too. The planet was cruel in the daytime, but it was worse at night. The sun burned with a dry heat during the day, yet when it vanished behind the broken horizon, the air froze like glass. Daniel and Liara learned to move when the sun was up, and hide when the dark returned. It was survival, nothing more. But even survival was never easy. Food was their greatest enemy. The crash had left little behind, and the planet itself offered almost nothing. The roots Daniel dug from the earth were bitter and hard, scraping the throat with every swallow. Liara gagged, the first time, her silver eyes watering as she forced herself to chew. But when Daniel pushed the food toward her again, she took it, trembling but determined. "You'll get sick if you don't eat," he said firmly. Her voice cracked, but she answered, "I'll try." And she did. Every day. Even when her hands shook from hunger, even when her body rejected the harsh taste, she ate what he gave her. It wasn't strength that made her endure. It was will. And Daniel couldn't help but respect that. Yet fear was never far away. Sometimes distant echoes of gunfire rolled through the ruins, Not the sound of hunting, but the sound of war. Human soldiers were still searching the planet, rooting out survivors. Liara's people had been their enemies, and any alien found alive was to be captured, or worse. When the gunfire cracked in the distance, Liara always froze, her body curling tight, her glowing eyes wide with terror. She would press close to Daniel, trembling violently, her breath quick against his chest. "They'll find me," she whispered one night, her voice so thin it nearly broke. "Your kind will kill me." Daniel didn't answer at first. He stared into the shadows of the ruined ship, the weight of her words heavy on him. He had once been like those soldiers outside, trained to see her kind as targets, not people. But things had changed. "They won't," he said at last. His voice was steady, but inside his heart twisted. He was making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Liara looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with doubt and hope all at once. She didn't argue. She simply pressed closer, as though his words alone could shield her from the cold world outside. The storms grew worse as the weeks dragged on. The cold nights became sharper, biting through even the strongest fabric. Daniel often woke with his own body trembling, his energy fading from giving too much warmth to Liara. He could feel himself getting weaker. His ribs stood out more each day, his steps grew heavier. Yet when Liara pressed close to him at night, whispering in her half-broken human tongue, "Warmth, thank you," he couldn't bring himself to stop. She needed him. That was reason enough. But one night, the fragile peace shattered. The sound of boots came first, heavy, marching boots that did not belong to scavengers or raiders. Then came the harsh voices, sharp and commanding, bouncing off the ruined walls. Human soldiers. Daniel's heart froze. He knew that sound too well. They were his people, his old unit, or one like it. Men trained to kill the very girl lying beside him. Liara sensed it instantly. Her silver eyes widened with fear and she grabbed his sleeve, her voice breaking. "Daniel, they will take me." Daniel's mind raced. If the soldiers found her, they would not ask questions. She was an alien. To them, she was dangerous, worthless, a target. No one would care that she was small or weak or shivering. They would shoot her or worse, capture her for experiments. The soldiers' voices grew closer. Their lights cut through the darkness, beams sweeping across the ruins like knives. Daniel grabbed Liara's hand. "Come on." They ran through the broken corridors, his boots silent from years of practice, her steps lighter than he expected. But fear made her stumble, and once she nearly fell. Daniel caught her, pulling her close until she found her balance again. He could feel her heart pounding wildly through her trembling hands. At last they turned a corner and found themselves face to face with a squad of armed men. Rifles lifted instantly. Flashlights blinded Daniel's eyes. "Drop your weapon, hands up," one soldier barked. Daniel froze. His rifle was slung across his back, his hands instinctively twitching toward it. But he didn't move. He glanced at Liara, who pressed against him like a cornered animal, her breath coming in short gasps. One of the soldiers spotted her. His voice hardened. "Alien, step aside, Sergeant, we'll deal with her." Daniel's blood ran cold. They knew him. These were his people. His rank, his name, still meant something here. He could step aside, and no one would blame him. They would take Liara, and his duty would be fulfilled. But as Liara clutched his arm tighter, Daniel felt the weight of every night they had shared. The trembling of her body in the cold, the whisper of her name, the fragile trust in her eyes. She wasn't an enemy anymore, she was a life. A life he had promised silently but completely to protect. He stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. His voice was calm, but iron hard. "She's with me." The soldiers hesitated. "Sergeant, move. That's an order." Daniel's jaw clenched. Orders. He had lived his entire life following them, obeying without question. But for the first time, he felt the weight of choosing differently. His rifle came off his back in one smooth motion, He raised it not at Liara, not at himself, but at his own men. I said, he growled, his finger resting near the trigger. She's with me. The air turned to stone. The soldiers stared at him in shock, unsure if he was bluffing. Liara pressed closer behind him, her breath warm against his back. He could feel her trembling, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was trust. You've lost your mind, Daniel. One soldier spat. She's not human. She's a threat. Daniel's voice shook, but he held his ground. She's not a threat. She's alive. That's enough. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world hung between fire and silence. Then chaos erupted. A shot rang out, shattering the stillness. Bullets tore through the ruins, sparks flying as stone and steel exploded around them. Daniel grabbed Liara's hand and pulled her down, dragging her through the smoke. His heart thundered, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Behind them, the soldiers shouted his name, their voices full of anger and betrayal. Ahead of him, the only thing that mattered was the small, trembling figure who refused to let go of his hand. That night, Daniel made his choice. Not as a soldier, not as a human, but as a man who had promised warmth to someone who needed it. Gunfire tore the night apart. The once silent ruins exploded with fire, shouts, and the sharp crack of rifles. Sparks danced against the broken walls and smoke choked the air. Daniel pulled Liara with all the strength left in his body, his boots sliding over rubble as bullets ricocheted around them. "Keep running," he shouted, his voice hoarse. Liara stumbled, her thin legs struggling to keep pace, but she never let go of his hand. She clung to him like a lifeline, her glowing eyes wide with terror. Every sound of metal splitting, every spark of gunfire made her flinch. Yet still she moved forward, her breath ragged, her steps desperate. Behind them, soldiers cursed his name. "Daniel, stop! Don't throw your life away for her." But Daniel didn't stop. He knew if he faltered for even a second, they would both be lost. His loyalty to the army had ended the moment he raised his rifle against them. There was no going back. A burst of gunfire struck the wall beside him, stone shattering and cutting across his arm. He gritted his teeth, pulling Liara tighter against him to shield her from the spray. Blood trickled down his sleeve, warm and sticky, but he ignored it. They crashed through a half-collapsed tunnel, the ceiling groaning under its own weight. The air inside was thick with dust, every breath burning Daniel's lungs. His vision blurred, but he pushed forward, dragging Liara through the darkness. She cried out when her foot caught on a jagged piece of metal. She stumbled hard, nearly falling, but Daniel caught her and hauled her back up. "Don't stop," he rasped. "Not now." Her voice cracked, trembling with fear. "You'll die. You'll die for me. Stop, please." Daniel turned his head, his face streaked with dust and blood, his eyes hard with determination. "Better me than you." The words hit her like a blade. She stared at him, breathless, her lips parting as if to protest again. But the look in his eyes silenced her. It wasn't recklessness, it was resolve. He had chosen her. The tunnel opened into another ruin, this one filled with broken beams and collapsed walls. Daniel guided her through, his movement sharp, despite the pain gnawing at his side. He could feel blood soaking through his uniform, could feel his strength leaking away with every heartbeat. Yet he refused to slow. Liara's hand pressed against his arm as they ran. Even in the chaos, even with fear strangling her voice, she whispered, "Don't leave me." He almost laughed, though his chest burned too much for sound. "I couldn't if I tried." Another burst of gunfire echoed behind them, closer now. Daniel knew they couldn't outrun soldiers forever. He searched the ruins desperately, his eyes catching on a narrow passage leading into deeper shadow. Without hesitation, he pulled Liara into it. They crouched low, crawling through broken stone until the noise of pursuit began to fade. Daniel collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. His hand pressed against his bleeding side, trying to hold back the warmth pouring out of him. Liara knelt beside him, her silver hands trembling as they touched his arm. She stared at the blood, her eyes filling with tears. Why do you give so much for me?" Daniel's voice was weak but steady. Because you need me. Her tears slipped down her cheeks, glowing faintly in the dim light. She had no words for him, only the way she pressed her hands harder against his wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. Her small body shook as she leaned into him, giving him her warmth for the first time. Outside, the ruins burned. Shouts and gunfire still echoed in the distance, but for a fragile moment, they were hidden in the shadows, safe from the storm. Daniel leaned his head back, his eyes heavy. He felt Liara's warmth seep into him, weak but steady, as though she was pouring her life into his failing body. For once, he let himself rest, let himself trust her as much as she trusted him. He didn't know if they would survive the night. He didn't know if the soldiers would find them. But in that moment, one truth held him steady. He had chosen her and she had chosen him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The world outside still burned with fire and war, but inside, the ruins, Daniel and Liara searched for a place to hide. Daniel's body grew weaker with every step. His arm hung heavy at his side, blood soaking through his sleeve, his face pale from loss of strength. Yet he refused to stop. Each time Liara begged him to rest, he shook his head. Not here, not yet. Finally, after what felt like hours of stumbling through dust and broken stone, they found a narrow passage leading into the cliffs. At the end of the winding path was a cave, hidden deep inside the rocks. It was dark, silent, and far from the reach of soldiers' voices. Daniel collapsed the moment they entered. His knees hit the cold ground, his breath ragged, his body giving out at last. Liara cried out and knelt beside him, her trembling hands reaching for his face. "Daniel, stay awake." Her voice cracked, filled with panic. She pressed her palms against his bleeding side, but the blood still flowed through her fingers. Her silver tears dripped down her cheeks, glowing faintly in the dark cave. He forced, his eyes open, staring at her through the haze of pain. "I'm not going anywhere." His lips curled into the faintest smile, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Not while you still need me." Liara shook her head, her hands shaking harder. "No, I need you alive." For the first time since their nights together began, Daniel saw her taking control. She tore at her own thin clothing, ripping it into strips to press against his wound. She held them down with all her strength, ignoring the way her hands turned red with his blood. Her small body bent over his, shielding him from the cold air as if her warmth could replace the heat leaving him. Daniel's vision blurred, but he could still feel her touch, steady and determined. "You're stronger than you think," he murmured, his voice fading. Liara bent lower, pressing her forehead against his chest. "No, I am only strong because of you. You gave me warmth when I had nothing. You gave me life." The cave was silent except for their breaths, his shallow and weak, hers fast and desperate. For hours she refused to leave his side, holding the wound closed, whispering words in her own language when her human words failed. Though Daniel didn't understand them, he could hear the fear, the hope, the prayer inside every sound. Slowly, painfully, the bleeding slowed. The strips of fabric grew heavy and soaked, but the flow of red eased under her hands. Daniel's breaths evened out, though they were still weak. When his eyes finally closed, it was not the collapse of death, but the surrender of a man too exhausted to fight the darkness any longer. Liara did not sleep. She sat beside him all night, cradling his head in her lap, her glowing eyes watching every rise and fall of his chest. Her tears dried, leaving faint silver marks on her face. For once, she was not the one trembling in the cold. She was the one giving warmth, protecting instead of being protected. When dawn touched the cave entrance, Daniel stirred faintly. His eyes opened, slow and heavy, and he looked up at her. She smiled through her exhaustion, relief flooding her features. "You live," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod, his voice hoarse but steady. "Because of you." Liara bent closer, her hand brushing his face gently. "No, because we kept each other warm." The words hung between them, heavier than the cave walls, stronger than the fire outside. Something had shifted. No longer was it a human soldier saving an alien girl. It was two broken souls holding one another against a world that wanted them gone. That day Daniel rested in the cave, his strength slowly returning under Liara's care. She gathered what little food she could, fetched water from a nearby stream, and returned to him every time, never leaving his side for long. Each time she touched him, she whispered, "Stay alive." And each time, he answered with a faint smile. In the heart of the cave, where no enemy could see, a fragile bond became something stronger. Daniel had given her warmth to survive. Now Liara was giving him warmth to live. Days passed in the hidden cave. The storm outside raged on, and sometimes the distant sound of soldiers still echoed through the cliffs. But inside, Daniel and Liara carved a fragile peace for themselves. The cave was cold, the food scarce, and Daniel's wound healed slower than he wished, yet life continued. Every morning when he opened his eyes and saw Liara sitting close, watching him with steady silver eyes, he felt the strength to rise again. She cared for him with hands that had once trembled from weakness, but now moved with quiet determination. She gathered roots in bitter plants, carried water in broken metal pieces, and even learned to spark small fires using his old tools. When he was too weak to stand, she sat by him and pressed her warmth against him, whispering words in her soft voice until his breathing calmed. One night, when the fire was low and their bedroll lay spread out on the rough stone, Liara spoke with a gentleness Daniel had never heard before. "When I first came to you," she said, her glowing eyes fixed on the flames, "I thought you would push me away. I thought humans hated us." Daniel stared at the fire as well, his jaw tightening. "I was supposed to." She turned to him, confusion flickering across her face. "Then why didn't you?" For a long moment he did not answer. The cave was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Then with a sigh, Daniel looked at her. "Because when you crawled into that bedroll, I didn't see an enemy," he said slowly. "I saw someone cold, afraid, and alone. And I knew what that felt like." Liara's eyes softened, her lips parting as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was light, trembling not from cold but from emotion. "And you gave me warmth," she whispered. "Not just to survive, to believe again." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You gave it back. When I was bleeding, when I thought I was finished, you kept me alive." The words hung heavy between them, carrying the weight of every night they had shared, every moment they had fought side by side. The bond between them was no longer just survival. It was something stronger, something unspoken yet undeniable. The days turned to weeks. Daniel's strength returned little by little. The soldiers searched the ruins above less often now, their voices fading with each passing day. Perhaps they believed him dead. Perhaps they no longer cared. Whatever the reason, the danger lessened, and the silence grew deeper. In that silence, Daniel and Liara built something fragile but real. They learned each other's languages more fully. He taught her words she didn't know, pointing at the fire, the water, the sky outside the cave. She repeated them in her soft voice, smiling when she got them right. In return, she taught him words of her people, strange sounds that rolled gently off the tongue, carrying meanings of hope, warmth, and life. One evening, as they sat together, beneath the stars outside the cave, Liara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Your world is broken," she murmured, "and so is mine. But here, with you, I feel whole." Daniel looked at her, at the faint silver glow of her skin beneath the starlight, and felt something stir inside him that he had long thought buried. He wasn't just keeping her alive anymore. He was living again because of her. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "Then we'll stay whole," he said quietly. "Together." She turned her face up to him, her eyes shining like moons. "Together," she echoed. That night, they lay side by side in the bedroll, not because she needed his warmth to survive, but because they needed each other's warmth to live. No words were spoken. None were needed. The war outside might never end. The world might remain broken. But in that cave, in the bond between a human soldier and an alien girl, a flame burned. Fragile, defiant, unyielding. It was not the flame of battle, nor of destruction. It was the flame of humanity. The warmth that refused to die even when the cold tried to smother it. And as long as that flame lived between them, Daniel knew one truth: they would endure, together.